Hello, friends. The 1012 days of the war between Russia and Ukraine continues. Today, Ukrainian experts report that Russian troops have brought in fresh forces and equipment to increase pressure on key areas in the areas of Pokrovsk, Kurakovy, and Velika Novosilka. A map from the Ukrainian military telegram channel Deep State shows that the Russians continue to advance relatively quickly to the south of Pokrovsk. They approached the settlements of Shevchenko, Novotroitsky, and Novo-Olenivka, through which the road runs in the direction of Kurakovy. The Russians are less than a kilometer away from Shevchenko, said Ukrainian fighter Bunyatov. The pace of advance and the number of the enemy in this direction are not just superior, they are many times superior, he added. Commenting on this section of the front, fighter Muchnoy writes that the enemy is moving along a wide front here and it will be difficult to stop him, so they should have time to enter Pokrovsk by winter. According to him, there is a lot of equipment here, there are also enough personnel, so the situation will only get worse. The battle for Kurakovy is already underway in the village of Stary Turny, which is key to the defense of the city. This follows from the updated map of Deep State. The Telegram channel writes that Russian troops have made important advances in Kurakovy. Now the Russians have begun to storm the industrial zone, which they have already begun to raze to the ground. Apparently, this is the western part of the city. A breakthrough from Stary Turny will greatly complicate the holding of the industrial zone, since the enemy will be able to approach from two sides, completely blocking logistics, Deep State reports. Speaking about the situation around Stary Turny, the Telegram channel writes that, in this area, false information continues to be provided to the top regarding the holding of positions. Fighter Muchnoy also writes about problems in Kurakovy. According to him, our defense is gradually sagging, the enemy is climbing from all flanks, and it is no longer realistic to knock him out. The enemy's control is constantly expanding in the area of the high rises. There are also successes to the south of the city. The situation is also getting worse in the north. The Russians have almost reached the dam. If we do not completely destroy the dam, the Russians will be able to enter the rear of our troops, writes Muchnoy. To the north of Velika Novosilka, Russian troops broke through to the settlement of Novi Komar, reports a Ukrainian military man with the call sign Alex. This is terribly complicating the situation of our troops in this area, writes Alex. The Ukrainian armed forces have not officially reported on the advance of the Russians here. I will note that Novi Komar is located to the north of Velika Novosilka. And if the Russians capture it, this will mean that the Ukrainian armed forces in Velika Novosilka will be half encircled. The capture of Novi Komar will also open the way for the Russians to advance further west in the direction of the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions, entering the rear of the Ukrainian troops on the southern front. Ukrainian military observer Mikov writes that in Velika Novosilka, the enemy has advanced up to 1 kilometer into the town from the eastern side. Our right flank in the area of Novopol and Novosilka has also begun to sag, unfortunately. It is not critical yet, but the alarm bells are ringing. The situation as a whole is gradually becoming critical. The bad news does not end there. The Ukrainian military telegram channel, Deep State, writes that the Russians have crossed the Oskil River in boats in another place near the village of Masyutovka in the Kupiansk area. According to the resource, this is already the second Russian bridgehead on the western bank of the Oskil. Now the Russians are trying to gain a foothold south of Dvorachna. Fighting also continues at the bridgehead near Novominsk, where the enemy attempted to reach Figulovka but was stopped. While the situation is difficult, the defense forces are trying to stabilize it, the Telegram channel writes. Yesterday, Zelensky said in an interview with Sky News that he was ready to end the war in Ukraine without returning the captured territories in exchange for NATO membership. At first glance, this statement seems sensational, since Zelensky has effectively officially abandoned the key point of his peace formula, That is, war until all territories within the 1991 borders are returned. Over the past few years, Zelensky and his associates have constantly said that any proposals that would provide for a ceasefire along the front line without returning the captured territories are Putin's project. They also dismissed the periodic talk of ending the war along the front line in exchange for joining NATO. And then, suddenly, Zelensky personally voiced this capitulationist formula in plain text. A shock, a sensation, a sharp turn, a change in concept. Not quite. First of all, we need to consider the time when Zelensky said this. This happened shortly after Trump nominated Keith Kellogg as his special representative for Ukraine, who had previously voiced his plan for ending the war, a ceasefire along the front line, and refusal to accept Ukraine into NATO. Similar ideas were voiced by other members of Trump's team. After that, Zelensky and his allies from the hawkish party in the West apparently came to the conclusion that the probability of Trump putting forward exactly this plan was very high, and therefore apparently decided to take a number of actions to disrupt it in advance. Namely, to achieve an official invitation to NATO before the inauguration is the maximum task. If this does not work out, because a number of NATO countries will definitely be against it, then at least convince Trump to change the peace plan by excluding the clause on Ukraine not joining the alliance. The calculation is that in this case Putin, who insists on a neutral status, will definitely reject such a plan and the war will continue. That is, Zelensky's statement does not indicate his readiness to end the war along the front line, but his desire to prevent this from happening. But not through Ukraine's refusal, but through Russia's refusal. Another question is that Trump's multi-move can be figured out very quickly and a moratorium on Ukraine's membership in NATO can be preserved. Although, for sure, a powerful campaign to convince the elected U.S. president to accept Zelensky's idea will now unfold, as well as attempts to organize an invitation to Ukraine to the alliance even before the inauguration. Zelensky's popularity has fallen, and most voters would prefer that he not run for a second term. These are the results of a survey by the Social Monitoring Center, cited by the British newspaper The Times. I note that the study itself has not been published on the center's website, but the media write that it was conducted by order of the American organization American Political Services. Only 16% would vote for Zelensky's re-election for a second term, and about 60% would prefer that Zelensky not run at all. If the current president decides to run, he will lose to Yevhenii in the first round, who will be supported by 27% of voters. That is, the former commander-in-chief is more than 10% ahead of Zelensky. The publication explains this by the fact that corruption scandals and war fatigue have damaged his image. Zelensky's popularity may also fall even more if he gives in to U.S. demands to lower the mobilization age to 18. The newspaper recalls that Zelensky could not sign a law lowering this age from 27 to 25 for almost a year. Talk about elections in Ukraine has intensified after Trump's victory in the U.S., the newspaper writes. Friends, this channel exists solely thanks to your support. If you have the opportunity and desire to support the channel, I will be very grateful to you. Thank you very much and see you in the next video.